I see we are now live, so great to have everybody here. Welcome. We've got just an absolutely fantastic group here today. We've got Mario, and is it Limaduran? Is that the way to pronounce it? No.
Limaduran, yeah. Lima like
Limaduran.
Lima,
Okay.
Peru, Duran like
Mar
Duran Duran. Mhm.
Mario, joining us from Trifecta. Thank you so much for joining us. And we've got Julie G here. Thank you so much, Julie, who's really been one of the writers of one of the books, who's done so much for so many people, and for, of course, the founder of apoe4.info. And then also Lynn Killips, who is part of our clinical trial and doing a fantastic job, who's a nutritionist, who's a health coach, and who's helping so many people. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here. I want to give just a 1 minute of background. Why are we doing what we're doing? We spent, as many people know, we spent 30 years in the laboratory looking at the molecular details of what actually drives cognitive decline, what actually drives the neurodegenerative process. And we found, specific signaling pathways. We found that anything that is driving inflammation is very important. Anything that is driving toxicity is very important. Anything that is reducing energetic support, mitochondrial function, blood flow, oxygenation, sleep apnea, all these sorts of things, critical. And so we started to see that what has been called Alzheimer's, they talked about misfolded proteins and amyloid. It's really ultimately about a network insufficiency. And so you need to have optimal nutrition and exercise and oxygen support and blood flow and all these sorts of things. And a critical piece of this, arguably the most important piece of this, is to get optimal nutrition. So many of us we've lost both the ability to metabolize glucose optimally and the ability to make ketones. So it's like a Prius that's sputtering, that just doesn't have the right fuel. And so when we see people with cognitive decline or risk for decline, we want to bring back their insulin sensitivity. We want to bring back their ability to make ketones and basically to be metabolically flexible. As Julie and my wife, Dr. Lasheen, remind me frequently, got to get into that metabolic flexibility. And there's no question, this helps again and again and again. So we're thrilled to be interacting with Trifecta. They are the real experts in this area. And maybe, Mario, if you could just give us a little bit of background on Trifecta, how it got started, and how you got into doing these different types of meals,
Mhm.
and how you source your ingredients that are so critical for getting best outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be part of this group and supporting such a beautiful cause of fighting cognitive decline and mental health. So Trifecta has been around for nine, I believe this is our 10th year in business, and we've always been highly focused on providing healthy meals that are macronutrient balanced, made with the best quality ingredients possible. And over time, we've not only gotten better, but the meals have gotten tastier. So it's been a beautiful journey. I've been with the company for 6.5 years, going on 7. So there's been a beautiful journey there from where I started to where we are now. And I would have to say that we are at the best period of Trifecta when it comes to the quality of the products. We kind of started in the sports realm, and really focused on providing very healthy and macro balanced meals to an athletic population, but we supply meals to many different populations, whether it's someone that's looking at losing weight for general health to someone that's looking at supporting their mental health. We cover the entire realm with not only the types of meals that we have with the different sort of focuses, but also with the high quality ingredients and the balanced macronutrients that we offer per meal. On the sourcing side of things, a big differentiator of Trifecta is that we, like I mentioned, focus on the quality of the ingredients. There are many meal delivery services out there in today's day and age, and there's a lot of convenient and conventional meal deliveries that are just supplying food for people that just want to reheat something very quickly. It's more so an evolution of the frozen dinners that came about in the 1960s. It's just the natural evolution of the space. And so Trifecta comes in as a differentiator in that we are providing the convenient aspect of having a meal ready to reheat, but we're also providing a balanced meal where you're not going to have too much of any macronutrient, of any fat, protein, or carbohydrate. You have a balance of sodium, of micronutrients, of fiber. You have your vegetables, your carbohydrates, you have your heart healthy fats, and then your high quality protein. And we also focus on sourcing ingredient produce. Right now, we're currently moving towards reaching a 75% marker on having our produce be at that level. Well, that's our goal by the end of the year. Being in the commercial food space, that's quite the challenge, but we're confident that we can get there. We've been actively working on that. And as far as the proteins go, we source proteins that are humanely raised, antibiotic free, no hormones added, vegetable fed, grass fed, so on and so forth, so that the animal in itself lives a very healthy lifestyle, has all those nutrients in their system when they're taken to being processed, and then we can serve that high quality meal and protein as in general. So that's a little scope of what Trifecta is and what we stand.
That's fantastic. So, and as a neurologist, it makes all the difference. And time again, we see that a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet with high phytonutrients, high fiber, soluble and insoluble, it improves your insulin sensitivity. It improves your ability to be metabolically flexible. It
Hmm.
improves your ability to detox. It improves your gut microbiome. It improves your glycemic load. It improves your lipid status, and it improves your cognition. So this is, literally a life and death issue. People are either going to get better or they're going to go downhill.
Hmm.
And actually, we have interim data on the trial that Lynn is involved with. And it is striking. If you look at the composite memory scores, they are going, just as you'd expect, down, down, down in the standard of care group, and they're going up, up, up in the treatment group. So it's really great to see, and it's statistically significantly different. So we will be publishing that early next year. The trial will finish in October. And of course, a KetoFLEX 12-3 type of diet, plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet, is an important part of this. I actually had one of your meals today. I had the barbacoa chicken today with cauliflower. Last Friday I had the kung pao shrimp with broccoli, which was fantastic, and some extra virgin olive oil, as recommended by Julie. Thank you for that, Julie. And it was fantastic. So you're right.
Yeah.
So many people want to provide food without providing health.
Great.
And we need both. We need the food, but we need the health with it. And this is the sort of diet. So I want to go to Julie next, because Julie has really been, more than anybody, involved with creating these and working with you guys and getting
Hmm.
the right things so they would be delivered to people, making sure that they're not too high in carbohydrates, making sure that they are organic, making sure that they pass all the right tests. So Julie, could you talk a little, you've been so centrally involved in this, and how you have worked with Trifecta, and why you decided, why you like working with Trifecta as the way to get these meals to people to get optimal cognitive outcomes.
Yeah, I have to say it's been a pleasure working with Mario. We identified Trifecta because of their high quality ingredients, because while the industry is moving away from organic, they're moving in the exact opposite direction, moving towards cleaner and cleaner proteins, great, nutrient dense produce, always chemical free. But when I began working with Mario, he gave me this enormous Google questionnaire. And he said, I want you to tell me everything about this diet. I want you to list every single ingredient. I want you to tell me what's going to make the difference for brain health. And he was very patient with me. And I don't know, we went through maybe 10 pages. I described the diet in painstaking detail so that Trifecta understands our needs and he's able to tailor the meals to be exactly what our audience needs. And I appreciate his curiosity and willingness to learn about it.
Yeah, great. I just saw a patient about a week ago who came and this guy is a guy who's in his 60s who had significant MCI, single copy of ApoE4, and had started doing the protocol and clearly was improved. He said, but I'm about 80% of the way back. He said, something's not quite right. And we looked and his hemoglobin A1C was still 5.7. And so I was like, wait, what are you doing? And he said, well, there's no problem with potatoes and pasta and some bread, right? And I said, wait a minute. You kind of missed like the central piece of he was doing, the exercise, he was doing the sleep, and he was getting his toxins down. He was doing a lot of things, but he didn't quite appreciate that, as you've always pointed out, you got to stay away from the grains. You got to stay away from the dairy. You got to stay away from the simple carbs. These are the sorts of things that can really do you in. And here he was doing a lot of things right, but missing like one of the most obvious. And this guy had been to some well-trained practitioners that had kind of not picked up on the fact that he was really cheating on the meal. So that one of the things I love about Trifecta is it makes it easy. So you don't have to say, oh, I don't go and get bread. The meal's there. As I say, I just had it a few minutes ago, and very easy to do. Heat it up, eat it. It's really fantastic. Put some EVOO on. I love the extra vegetables idea. That's really been great. And maybe you can say a little bit about there. We worked with a different service in the past that you worked with, and they came to a point where they said, well, we now want to scale big. So we want to get rid of the healthy things. It's like, well, wait, what are you talking about? This is all about, meals to make you healthier. So when you sacrifice organics and you start throwing in potatoes and a bunch of carbs and things, you are making a decision that we're now less interested in health than we are in scaling. And I think this is critical to be able to make that decision that we're going to stick with health. We'll scale it ultimately, but you've got to start with health. When you sacrifice that, you're sacrificing brain cells, from the patient.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were shocked when our previous supplier came to us and said, we no longer can offer organic. We're going to have to start adding more starchy carbs. We're going to need to put, some added sugars and some fruit juices in the meals. And I basically said, unless you've done research that we don't know about, that's no longer going to be effective for our population. And so that's a part of our journey that led us to Trifecta, because as I mentioned before, they're moving in the same direction we are. They're using food as medicine. They've been involved in lots of other clinical trials. I mean, they've got a proven track record, and all these institutions choose Trifecta because of the quality of their ingredients.
That's fantastic. And I think this is also going to ultimately be helpful for other things, even beyond cognitive change, things like people with early Parkinson's and things like that. Even there's a group that does this is so-called Healing ALS group that is very much into optimal nutrition as well. Coco Newton and her whole team there. So I think this is a burgeoning area and one that's important for all of us. Lynn, if I could come to you for a minute, you've obviously been really heavily involved right on the front lines with the ongoing clinical trial, with the previous clinical trial as well, and your training as a nutritionist. If you could talk a little bit about what you've been seeing with patients and how you got originally involved in nutrition and health coaching.
Yeah, so I've been really interested in health my entire life. I've been reading about nutrition ever since I had my children, and I was in the hospital and they gave me a plate of white pasta and red jello, and I'm like, this can't be very healing. So I started reading at that point many, many years ago about health and food as medicine, and then I finally did some formal training. And then health coaching was a little bit of a surprise because I wasn't quite sure what it was, but it was a really good program. And once I got involved with it, it's sort of magical. It's really amazing how you can be trained to work with a person where they can actually talk themselves into making this change. If you tell people to change, they don't necessarily change, as we can see it in the state of health in America. Doctors say one thing, and people don't do it. So it's really a collaborative approach. And I don't know how I was connected to Dr. Hathaway, and that's how she invited me to work on this study. But it's been, people think it's really hard to make these changes, and it's just, I don't call it hard, I call it different, and it's just a matter of deciding to do it and then doing it. I mean, you can even think of it as a trial. I'm just going to try this for a week, and then they end up doing it. So it's how they think about it more than anything. And I think a lot of people eat for different reasons. They eat out of habit, they eat out of boredom, for lots of reasons. But what's great about this KetoFLEX 12-3 diet is that when you're in ketosis, you don't feel like snacking. You know, you're very satiated, you're very satisfied. So the people I've worked with have been concerned that they wouldn't be satisfied, you know, with what they perceive as limitations, and it's not actually limitations. So it's what you tell yourself about this diet. But we've had really great success with people.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And I know Dr. Hathaway and you guys have done very well with getting people to get into their ketosis and becoming metabolically flexible, losing that insulin resistance very quickly. So that's been, and I think that's been one of the reasons you guys have been so successful. But you know, I have seen time and time again, you've got to have a well-trained physician and you've got to have a health coach who's really good, because they have different roles. And I've seen if you've just got one of those, it doesn't work as well. You've got to be part psychologist,
Right.
you've got to be part nutritionist, you've got to be part physician, you've got to be part like family friend. I mean, you do all these things, bringing it together to make these people change. Ariana Huffington talks about micro steps, you know, just slowly getting people to do behavioral changes. I know some people feel overwhelmed. So then you've got to take that into account and you've got to get them to do things. And again, starting with the optimal nutrition is a really important part of that. So I think that, you know, that is critical. And we're seeing, you know, again and again and again, getting best outcomes using that. Let's come back to Julie for a minute. Julie, if you could say a little bit about, you know, the wonderful website that you found that I mentioned, and I see you've got a cat there with you as well.
Ooh, this is
You got a cat tail.
I know.
Hello. So, but you started a website that's helped, you know, thousands and thousands of people who are a medical establishment. The current guideline is don't bother to check your ApoE status because there's nothing you can do about it. That is such an antiquated approach. We now know that there's a tremendous amount you can do, and it really got a huge start with your website. So maybe if you could say a little bit about something about people on the website and what do they do with their nutrition?
Sure. Well, first I'll take a step back and tell you how my website began.
Yeah.
About 13 years ago, I learned I was at very high genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease. I have 2 copies of the ApoE4 allele. And that knowledge forced me to take a hard look at my own cognition. And I recognized I wasn't doing very well. I was having some blips here and there, but I did some formal cognitive testing and I scored quite poorly. And that was terrifying because I learned at that point 13 years ago, and sadly, it's still true, except for our protocol, Dale. I learned there was no treatment for Alzheimer's. It was progressive and fatal. So it was a really scary time for me. But I banded together with other ApoE4 carriers from all over the world. I learned about my status through 23andMe, and they provided forums. And we literally created hundreds and hundreds of pages of information we were sharing about studies we read, experts that we consulted, and so on. And as we began learning about all these strategies, we transferred this information over to my nonprofit called apoe4.info. Anyone is welcome, whether you're an ApoE4 carrier or not. But we basically are searching for strategies to mitigate the pathological effects of the ApoE4 allele. After learning all that I did, I applied all of these strategies over a period of a year, and I retested my cognition, and I was in the 95th percentile. And I have to say, one of the most important strategies was nutrition. because at the time my cognition was suffering, I was the perfect storm of things going wrong. Not only was I an ApoE44, but I'd been in a previous car accident, so I'd had a head injury, I'd had Lyme disease, and I unknowingly had a Lyme disease co-infection. I was living in a moldy house. I was facing perimenopause without hormone replacement, and I was insulin resistant. So I mean,
Yeah.
everything that was wrong was present in me. But as I addressed all those things, and changing my diet was really key, because prior to doing that, I was experiencing hypoglycemia like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
I'm sure I had highs, but I never caught those. I caught devastating lows where I would almost lose consciousness.
Yeah.
And once I cut out those inflammatory foods that you mentioned, Dale, sugar, simple carbs, pretty much all whole grains and conventional dairy, and I replaced it with colorful leafy greens and non-starchy veggies from every color of the rainbow, and lots of healthy fats and clean proteins, just getting that clean nutrition on board. And I increased my fat more and more until I got into ketosis. The insulin resistance was gone and my blood sugar completely stabilized. You have steady energy and clarity all day long with this approach. So I learned firsthand the importance of diet and your entire protocol.
Yeah, and the armamentarium is growing. That's one thing that's fantastic. When I was training many, many years ago, we had nothing. We would just tell people, yes, you have Alzheimer's. We're very sorry. We have nothing for you. Then, of course, Aricept came along. And unfortunately, the people who go on Aricept at 5 years out are worse than the ones who don't go on it. So it hasn't been a long-term success. And this is, I think, the reason CGMs have been so helpful for so many people to see, as you said, both the peaks and the troughs. We see this all the time. People will say, I'm waking up at 4 a.m. Oh my gosh, they put a CGM on, their glucose is 45. They've really tanked. And both of those are bad for your brain. It's bad for your brain when you're up high. It's bad for your brain when you've dropped down low. So you're really hurting yourself. And you, as you said, you had a perfect storm. You had everything. If you
Everything.
wrote a chapter, How to Give Yourself Alzheimer's, which I did in the first book, you had it all. And I think that's why you developed your symptoms, as you said, in your 40s, as you wrote about. And now, 15 years later, you're doing great. So that is such a great story and so inspirational. We have, so many of these inspirational stories. It's just been great to see again and again and again. So we've got some fantastic questions here. And actually, I wanted to start with just ordering. How do you get this? Because the first question here is, how do you get this? She says, this is from Andrea, who says, I'm very interested in ordering. In March, when the announcement came out, I tried to order. Process was not so clear then. Beyond the 15-minute discovery call, will there be a phone number at Trifecta for questions? So maybe we could talk a little bit about ordering. Julie and Mario and Lynn, if you could help people, how can they get these meals?
Sure. Lance, you've got an image you want to share.
Great.
So you can scan this image now to get to the link, or go to KetoFLEX123.com. All new users will get 50% off their first box. Super easy to order. This will take you to our landing page. And on the landing page, you can scroll down to sign up for a free 15-minute phone call with Lynn, who's happy to answer any questions that you've got. And if there's questions Lynn can't answer, she will direct you to the customer service team at Trifecta.
Fantastic. That's very helpful. Thank you. Then Andrea goes on to say, I've just been diagnosed with advanced lipidemia as well as lymphedema. May make a difference in which plates I order. Again, information on ingredients that are available, and someone at Trifecta also working with plates. So again, yeah, I think thankfully you've got a wonderful nutritionist here in Lynn who can point you in the right direction, and then you've got further support from Trifecta. And then Andrea's final question here, last year out of the blue, diagnosed with intermediate macular degeneration. Yeah, so we've been interested in all the degenerative conditions, all the major neurodegenerative conditions, and I would include in there age-related macular degeneration. Each of these, what's really fascinating about these is that these are essentially coming from the fact that through evolution, we selected performance over durability. So we have these incredible performing brains, incredible performing maculae, incredible performing brains with respect to motor modulation. So when your neuroplasticity, it's like a Ferrari going 240 miles an hour all the time. When that begins to break down, that's what's leading to Alzheimer's. When the motor modulation piece, also highly evolved, starts to break down, that gives you Parkinson's. When you have the power amplification piece, that gives you ALS. So each of these is a very, very finely tuned system. And you're right, this is why we look at both the supply and the demand for these things. And of course, the KetoFLEX 12-3 approach from Trifecta, that is a part of optimizing our supply and reducing the demand by improving inflammation and things like that. Now, with respect to macula, it's very interesting. The macula is the area of the essentially highest metabolic rate in the body. So the Achilles heel for that particular system is in two things. It is energetic flow, so it's blood flow, oxygenation. People with sleep apnea, for example, have increased risk for macular degeneration. So it's all the supply. This is why things like EWAT, very helpful, exercise with oxygen therapy, reducing inflammation, getting endogenous ketosis, being metabolically flexible. And then the second piece is complement system. So in fact, it's the CFH mutations that are associated with increased risk. By the way, ApoE4 reduces your risk for macular degeneration, and ApoE2 increases your risk. So it's just the opposite of what you see with Alzheimer's disease. So there's a lot to do in this area, and we don't have nearly as much data as we do with Alzheimer's disease. But going to someone who is aware of these sorts of things. A good example, Dr. Tennant in Texas is a good example. He uses EWAT as part of his overall treatment. So this is coming, and the great thing is you can get screened very early through an optometrist who uses OCT, for example. So you can catch this very early, which is nice. Same idea that we're now doing with the blood testing for Alzheimer's. We call this brain scan. So you can actually I just had it done in my kitchen a few weeks ago, getabrainscan.com. You can actually get testing so that you can see, just like getting a hemoglobin A1C, you can see if you're headed for concern. So next one here is from Patricia. She said, would Mario elaborate on what, other than grass, some of the animals are fed, for example, corn or soy? And if so, are they at least non-GMO? Yeah, great point. This comes back to the sourcing. She's saying also how many of the proteins are cooked in immersion circulators, sous vide, if any.
Yeah.
So Mario, if you could address that, it would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say a great majority of our proteins are actually sous vide. That helps with maintaining the quality of the protein high. The cooking is maintained even throughout the cooking process, and that's helped tremendously with the quality and maintaining the quality consistent throughout our supply chain. And on the feed side of things, our chickens, our beef, our pork, they're all fed a vegetarian diet, grass-fed, pasture-raised. They graze around the pastures and open fields, so they're eating a variety of nutrients, not only from the soil and grass, but all the feed that the farmers give them is non-GMO. That's a big part of our product specifications. We don't accept anything or serve anything that has a GMO component to it. So as far as oils that we use in meals, Patricia, also I see that asked that question. We only use olive oil and avocado oil. We stay away from any seed oil. You might see some canola in some sauces, but we're not, of course, we're not serving that to the KetoFLEX 12-3 population, and that's not part of the menu that we're serving you guys. But so all of the oils that you can see are going to be mainly, strictly olive oil and avocado oil.
Great point. And when I got my Kung Pao shrimp last Friday, Julie said, okay, heat it up in some avocado oil, and then be generous about pouring some EVOO on it, which I did, and it actually was fantastic that way. So thank you for those tips, Julie. If I can do it, anybody can do it, because I'm the last person to be caught around a stove. So
Dale,
thank you for that.
that's an important point to make. So after you've reheated your trifecta meal, we
Yeah.
encourage you to add up to 4 tablespoons of the highest polyphenol extra virgin olive oil that you can tolerate. And I say that because high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil can cause a little tickle in the back of your throat, but it's an acquired taste. And it is so good for you. It improves brain structure, function, and cognition as much as Leqembi. Isn't that correct, Dale? I mean, olive oil does as much as the current leader for treating Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, it actually beat it at least in the
Beat it.
published trials.
Love it.
Wow.
The drug was actually slowing decline by 27%. The olive oil was actually improving the cognition. So in
Wow.
fact, it beat out the drug. So I think your point is well taken.
Mhm.
Carolina here says, is there any hope for people with advanced Alzheimer's? So absolutely. Now, when you develop Alzheimer's, you go through 4 phases. So you have a phase where you are normal cognition, where you can already see some changes in biomarkers, in spinal fluid, in PET scan, things like that, if you look. The second phase is called SCI, subjective cognitive impairment. And by definition, what that means is you know that something isn't quite right, but you're still able to score normally on cognitive testing. That lasts on average 10 years. Plenty to do. So this is why we encourage everybody. If you could get in during those first 2 phases, it's the easiest. We get complete improvement. Now, to be fair, in our trial, the trial that Lynn is involved with, we're only taking people in the 3rd and 4th stage. It's MCI, mild cognitive impairment, and early dementia. And by definition, what that means, MCI means now you've started to score abnormally on the testing. And that each year, that group, and it's too bad they called it mild cognitive impairment, because as one patient said, there's nothing mild about it. It's the 3rd of 4 stages. It's like telling someone, please don't worry, you only have mildly metastatic cancer. It's a relatively late stage of this process. The good news is on our first trial, which Lynn was also involved with, 84% of the people showed at least some improvement who were in that stage. And then the 4th and final stage, which means you've begun to lose your activities of daily living, is dementia, where you now are losing your driving, you're losing your ability to balance your checkbook, take care of yourself, all those sorts of things. So definitely earlier, easier, you don't have to do as much. However, we have seen people with MoCA scores of 0 improve, but they don't go back to a perfect 30. We've seen them go from 0 to 9, for example. They can get back the ability to talk. They can get back the ability to be continent. They can get back the ability to dress themselves, get back the ability to interact with their families, all of those. We're still working on the research side to understand, how do we go from 0 to perfect 30? Nobody has done that yet. I'm hoping with this, continuing armamentarium, stem cells and photobiomodulation and a plasma exchange and all these things, we will ultimately have the perfect way to get this back. So the point here is, we'd like to get in early, but please don't give up hope. If you're at essentially 15 or below on the MoCA, then please consider an assisted living that does this protocol. So the Vineyards in Fresno is doing this protocol in their residence. Marama was doing this, and unfortunately Marama had to close. This was started by Dr. Heather Sanderson, who's done such a great job. She's looking at opening there's a Marama now in Kansas. She's looking at opening another one in Southern California. So that's the way you'll get the kind of the full immersion and the best chance for improvement. I got a wonderful letter a few years ago from a guy saying, how dare you say early, my wife had a MoCA of 0 and she's done great. So yes, it happens, but it's harder and you have to do more. So the answer is, there's certainly hope, but we'd like for people to get in. One of the things I recommend for everyone who's farther along, please get all the children to get tested. Now we've got the biomarkers. Now you can see where you stand. You can see what your risk factors are. You can get some KetoFLEX 12.3, among other things, doing the basics, what we call the basic 7, that you can do to actually improve things and really reduce your risk. Next one here is from Elizabeth. How do you get, let's see, Elizabeth, here we go. Enough protein without zero fat yogurt to get to 100 grams per day. So how do you get enough protein without zero fat yogurt? So maybe Julie, you could talk a little bit about what this diet actually looks like, because it's not a low fat diet, that's for sure.
No, and that's a really high amount of protein as well. So I'm actually going to toss this to Lynn.
Okay.
Lynn, how would someone figure out the optimal amount of protein for themselves?
Yeah, so there are calculators online that you can use. There are calculators in the Apollo dashboard for those people that are already signed up. But it's usually to about 8.8 to 1.0 grams per kilogram of body weight. So to get your body weight in kilograms, you divide your weight by 2.2. So for example, a 140-pound person would, what is that? Anyway, the protein works out to about 65 grams at about 1.0 grams. So it's a pretty simple calculation, and if it's confusing at all, you can just look for that online, and those calculators are readily available. But it's important to figure out your protein, because too much protein can prevent you from getting into ketosis, or if you're already in it, it can knock you out of ketosis.
Yeah, and I would go back to say also from the biochemical side, this is high good fats, as Julie has always emphasized, and Lynn, it is intermediate protein, and it is low simple carb. That's the goal, and that is the thing that has helped the most in terms of cognition, and it's got, as we talked about earlier, multiple mechanisms. Next one here is from Sarah. She says, my mom was just started on Aricept, only been on it a few weeks. Should we stop giving it? No. So what we recommend in our trial, don't stop. You're on it. Just stay where you are. The people who did the worst were the ones that cold turkeyed it. Because what happens when you take Aricept? It inhibits the enzyme, the cholinesterase is the enzyme that breaks down your acetylcholine, which is the key neurotransmitter for memory. It is low in people with Alzheimer's, and their memories are poor, typically. So when you inhibit the enzyme, you now have more acetylcholine. If you suddenly stop it, what happens, your body has now responded to that by making more making more of the cholinesterase. So unfortunately, if you stop it, things are worse than before you started. So I would just leave it there, but now start adding these additional things so that you can actually support, because you're doing more than just getting more acetylcholine for your brain. You're improving the inflammatory status. You're improving the toxicity status. You're doing all the things that address why the amyloid is there and why the acetylcholine is low to begin with. And then Bethany says here, can you clarify, should someone stay in ketosis ideally continuously, or is there a cycling process? Great point. Julie, you could address this. And then we should also talk a little bit about people who are frail, because that is a different story from people who have a little extra fat, which makes it a little easier to get into ketosis. So Julie, maybe you could talk a little bit about cycling.
Sure. So for most folks that are a good, healthy weight, we encourage you to try to get into natural ketosis. And we do this by combining the diet with a long daily fast and with exercise. And we want you to hit about 1 to 1.5 millimoles at least once per day. And that tends to be enough for most people. If your cognition is better with higher amounts more consistently, that's fine. I know, Dale, you always say anywhere between 1 and 4. Most people do just fine hitting it once naturally. And so basically, you've taught your body, once again, how to get into ketosis. So you're getting the best of both worlds at that point. You've attained metabolic flexibility. So it's not steady ketosis all day long, unless that's what your brain needs if you're in the later stages. So that's a really great question, because I think a lot of people misunderstand that, and they think they have to be in a high level of ketosis all day, and we don't want that. And as you
And there's,
mentioned, for folks that are underweight, they have to be really careful
Yeah.
because number one, we don't want you engaging in a long daily fast.
right,
This particular group could benefit from exogenous ketones too.
exactly.
So you can use MCT oil or coconut oil or ketone salts or esters to help you get into ketosis, as well as eating lots of that healthy fat because fat is caloric. So you still get into ketosis, but you need to be very careful not to lose weight.
Yeah. And Lynn, if you could just speak for a moment too, if you've got two different patients coming to you, for example, on the trial, one of them has got a high BMI, has got plenty of extra fat and is insulin resistant, and you're getting him or her started versus the one who comes in with a BMI of 18 and is frail, because ultimately this is a network insufficiency in your brain. So there's a paradox. We're trying to get you insulin sensitive, but we have to be very careful about reducing too much. You don't want to go on long fast because you could hurt somebody. So how do you then deal with that?
Yeah, so I think a person who's frail and can't lose weight, I think you'd want, we ideally try to get people on 2 meals a day, which works for most people. But I think we would have that person on 3 meals per day. And I think it would be really important to make sure they're getting enough nutrients because often when people are thin and frail, they have less interest in eating than the person who tends to be a little bit more overweight. So it's just working with them to calculate what they need and make sure they're actually eating it. And always a great way to get more calories is to add more olive oil at each meal. But the micronutrients are important too. So it's important what you eat and then also when you eat. People typically lose some weight at the beginning when they're in ketosis just because of the water excretion, but that levels out. And so I would say that I've seen people gain weight in ketosis too. So it's just what you eat, when you eat it, and just have to be extra careful with the person that might not be able to lose weight.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Okay, thank you. The next one here is from Deborah, who says, wondering about ingredients that may have allergy and what does it mean like keto? So we're talking in terms of keto, we're talking about one, just as Julie was saying, 1 to 4 millimolar beta hydroxybutyrate. For the people who are doing significant ketosis, and this is not your standard keto, this is a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. We're looking at 1 to 4 millimolar. The people who do it, for example, for seizures, are in the 6 to 8 millimolar. That's more serious ketogenesis. You don't need that level typically. And I do remember a patient where Dr. Hathaway had a patient that did very well and lots of improvement, got very high ketosis, up in the kind of 4+ range, and was flying. And he said, wow, I'm doing so much better with my cognition, but I'm so amped up, I can't sleep at night. So you do have that you do have that situation where this stuff will make you, it's a little bit like having a little amphetamine on board. You do think quicker. You are sharper, almost like people taking Adderall. So you do have to be careful about that. We're looking at, as Julie said, that 1 to 2 is typically where we are, or a little above that. Maybe let's come back here to the ingredients that may have allergy. Uh, are there what sorts of responses? So Mario, what do you do in people who say I have allergies to certain things? Are there ways to direct them to specific groups that will not have specific components?
Yeah, I believe the landing page has a filtering aspect where you
Okay.
can filter out any ingredients that you may be allergic to. You can also call in, and our customer service team would be more than happy to support you with walking through all the meals and making sure that none of them have an allergen that you might have a reaction to. So those are the two best ways, but our landing page should have that filtering process.
Great. And then Julie and Mario, where do people find nutrient values before ordering, percent protein, fat, net carbs, et cetera? Where do they find that?
That is a great question. I know if you do a discovery call with Lynn, she has all of that information.
Right.
And Mario, I think the nutrition information is available before you order, but I'm not sure you've got the ingredients listed.
Yeah, I would have to double check on the
Okay.
landing page. I believe our tech team was working on and making that a part of the landing page experience.
Okay,
But I am not 100% confident, so I don't want to speak
sure.
incorrectly at the moment.
Yeah.
But Lynn does have all of the ingredients. So if anybody has
Mhm.
questions about that, you can do the free discovery call with Lynn, or you can call the Trifecta customer service team, and they're happy to tell you what the ingredients are. And I'm very glad that'll soon be on the landing page, if it isn't already.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next one here is from Marcia, who says the trifecta meals are delicious. I concur, Marcia. Really excellent. She says, my question is the amount of meat, fish in the meals compared to the amount of vegetables, which seems different than the previous provider. Concerned there isn't enough vegetables. So, as I mentioned, when I had the Kung Pao shrimp on Friday, I did as Julie suggested, adding the extra broccoli. And I think that that is important to know. I find that very helpful. And so what's the best way for people to order to make sure they get extra broccoli, extra green beans, things like that?
Yeah, Marcia brings up a really great point. So we highly recommend that everybody orders the veggie bundle. And this is a multi-pack of 3 different vegetables. We've got Asian Brussels sprouts, broccoli, and green beans. And so we want you to supplement what's in the trifecta meal with extra vegetables. It's difficult to get enough veggies in each of those trays. That's why we push the veggie bundle. And Lance, if you wouldn't mind sharing, I've just written a blog called Pro Tips to Maximize Success with the Trifecta Meals. And I talk about this, about the importance of adding your own leafy greens, adding the veggie bundle, add your own cruciferous veggies. We want everybody to get to 6 to 9 cups of those veggies per day. So if you're eating 2 meals, you need a hefty serving of vegetables. So thank you for bringing that up, Marcia.
Yeah, very important point.
Uh-huh.
Rex says, I don't like spicy foods. So how do I avoid meals like Kung Pao chicken? Now, I have to admit, I don't like spicy foods either. I was surprised at the Kung Pao chicken. It was not spicy. It
Yeah.
was delicious, actually, and especially with some EVOO on there, it was really fantastic. However, I do, and I know Aida noticed the Brussels sprouts were particularly spicy. So how do you get a KetoFLEX 12.3 hold the spice?
Yeah, so again, the filtering process, we do have a spice selection.
Uh,
So in the background that we've identified all the meals that do have a spice factor. Like you mentioned, Dr. Ritson, the Kung Pao is not spicy.
yeah,
There's no
great.
spice level to it, but we do have the buffalo chicken, which is a buffalo, like a healthy buffalo version of what you get at a restaurant. And the barbacoas that may be spicy to some people. So I would suggest avoiding those 3. Nevertheless, if you guys go to the landing page and you filter out spicy, those will be filtered out and you'll be able to select the rest of the meals. Now, note that if you're filtering anything out, and I think this is important for the audience to know, if you're filtering anything out of not liking an ingredient or a flavor profile or having an allergic aversion to an ingredient, there will be a repeat on the amount of meals that you select, since that's going to limit the amount of meals available. So that's something I think that's also important to know. You may be repeating a couple meals for a few days.
Great. Okay. And so I see that I appreciate that I think it was Marcia who mentioned, well, the question has disappeared here, but mentioned that she's reading the book, The Ageless Brain. Thank you. I really appreciate that. The whole point of The Ageless Brain is to save brain cells for all of us. I've written things about Alzheimer's in the past, and the idea with everyone is interested now in anti-aging. And of course, KetoFLEX 12.3 is part of the optimal approach. We want to look at brain aging and the things that are driving brain aging and what we can do to reduce the aging part and make sure that no matter what your lifespan is going to be, you want your brain span to be just as long. You don't want to live to 100 if you're going to be in a nursing home for much of that time, as we all agree. So yeah, thanks for reading it. I hope it will provide information to save brain cells for everybody. Jessica says here, we're interested in ordering what type of packaging is used for the meals. So could you talk a little bit about the packaging?
Yes, so the trays and the film that comes on top is plastic. However, what we suggest and highly encourage everyone is to reheat the meals by taking them out from the container. The trays, the food are shipped in trays that are vacuum sealed. So this technology allows to keep the meals fresher for longer, and it allows the meals to also look good. So you're not receiving just, you know, a little porridge of food. That's something that we definitely want to avoid. The food needs to look good as well when it's delivered.
Yeah, great point. So a couple of questions here relating to plastic. And I think these are very timely. A bunch of literature has just come out on microplastics. So number one of the findings was that microplastics accumulate in the brain more than the liver, more than the kidney. So it is really a site of accumulation. Second finding was there is a direct association in terms of how much microplastic is in your brain and how much your risk for cognitive decline. What it doesn't say yet is whether it's causal. It's not clear that is it because you are getting some problems with cognition that your blood-brain barrier becomes leaky, so you allow more microplastics in, or is it that in fact having those microplastics come in is giving you. It's not clear yet, and people are still looking into that. And it may be that it goes both ways, that actually the microplastics enhance the entry. We'll see over time. But of course, we all like to avoid the microplastics. So the question is, what happens? And you know, in the long run, it will be very helpful to know where do you stand with microplastics in the foods. My suspicion is when you're cooking at this low temperature, you're going to have a very good outcome. You're not going to be having these the way you do when you microwave things and stuff like that, where you're really putting in energy to create these things. But the question then is, are these things cooked in plastic? And if so, how do you avoid any problems with microplastics?
Yeah, I want to jump in here, and Lance, maybe you can put a link to a blog I wrote called My Review of the Trifecta Meals, because I address this plastic issue, because
Great.
so many in our audience are sensitive to this. So yes, they use plastic trays, but these are the cleanest, safest plastic trays possible. And I questioned Mario
She did.
mercilessly about this. I
She
said,
did. Mhm.
temperature is that food when it goes in that tray? I do not want hot food touching this plastic so that we have the potential for chemicals to leach into the food. And the food is actually quite cool when they do the packaging.
Yeah, completely cool. So part of food safety practices and the standards that are set by USDA and the FDA in general, food safety practices um, makes it, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm thinking in Spanish. Apologies to everyone. Um, they we're required, there you go. We're required to cool down all the food after it's completely cooked. So the food is cooked to its safe level, then it's completely cooled, and then it's plated in a cold environment. So the food it is never hot, it never touches hot plastic prior to being reheated. Well, it never
Right.
touches plastic really.
Yeah.
And all the plastic is recyclable. And on top of that, Trifecta is going to give you instructions on how to reheat the meals. And
Mhm.
one of the options is going to be to microwave the meal in the container. And while that may be safe for some audiences, and I know you've got the safest plastic possible, for our audience, we do not recommend that. We want you to transfer, if you need to microwave it, transfer it to a glass or ceramic heat-proof plate, and feel free to microwave. My favorite way to cook it is to saute on the stove, but you can also oven bake it. You can put it in an air fryer. Just don't char it so you get the advanced glycation end products that are going to end up hurting you. But we've done everything we can to make the plastic as safe as possible and protect us from microplastics.
Yeah, and the last recommendation that we have on the packaging is microwave. So that's even for us in our general population, we don't want that to happen just because the meal behaves and tastes so much better if it's air fried or reheated on the stovetop. So those are our two main suggestions on how to reheat the food.
Yeah, great points. So that's very helpful because I think, we're all understandably concerned currently about microplastics. So making sure that you avoid that is a huge issue. We're running up against time here, but we got a couple of last questions we can zip through. She says, Sonia says, I know you're working on a vegan protocol. How is that progressing?
Yeah, I mean, anybody right now can practice KetoFLEX 12.3 as a vegan. And we've got an excellent guide. And Lance, I keep asking you to do this, but I think it's called KetoFLEX 12.3 for vegans and vegetarians. And
Great.
so there's certain precautions you need to take to avoid certain macro and micronutrient deficiencies as a vegan that could actually predispose you to Alzheimer's disease. So you can safely do it. Just pay heed to these cautions. Trifecta, as far as a KetoFLEX 12.3 meals, is not currently offering a vegan option, but as we build volume, they are very, interested in building more meals for us. So the more of you who want the vegan meals, let us know. And, the more people who support us, the more options we can create.
Thank you. And Eleanor says, how long a time from cooking the meals to delivery? And I have to say that mine have been incredibly fresh, so I really appreciate they arrived, frozen. They've been fantastic. So really, really appreciate that. I know that it's not easy to do, and I have to say there have been other food services that have failed to do that. So I really appreciate the professionalism you guys have shown. But how long typically is the time from cooking to delivery?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the meal, depends on how busy we are. But we like to keep the time frame as short as possible. It's really hard to give you guys an average. I don't want to be dishonest, but they're as fresh as we can possibly make them in a commercial food service aspect.
Gotcha. Okay. And then just to finish up here, so Nancy's asking, she says, I've been diagnosed with amyloid plaques and with single copy ApoE4, would love all information possible. This is, they're very fortunate timing. There is so much that can now be done. I would say go on to apoe4.info. I would also go and get evaluated, get the one that says getabrainscan.com, see where you stand, what your p-tau level is, what your GFAP, what your NFL is, and then get a recode report so that you can actually see all the things. Work with a fantastic health coach like Lynn Killips so that you can really get the best outcomes and work with a trained practitioner. We've trained over 2,000 physicians from 10 different countries and all over the US. There is so much that can be done now to give you a very, very positive outcome for decades to come. So this is exactly what the sort of thing that Apollo is doing, the sort of thing that we are all involved with. So great question, and I hope that all will go well. Thanks to everybody. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you for having us.
Fantastic discussion. Someone's asking about seeing this later. Yes, it should be posted, so there should be no problem with seeing this. Let us know. We'll take the rest of the questions online. Let us know if there are any other things that come up. And thanks very much for all the great things that you guys are doing.
Right. Take
Thank you.
care.
Thank you for having us.
Guys,
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.